Hello. In this chapter, we'll talk about land use planning and its role in sustainable development. Land use planning is a form of public policy that governs how land is used by community residents within a defined geographic area, such as a state, province, county, district, or city. In theory, land use planning attempts to manage human activities through laws and regulations designed to make the most efficient use of land, natural resources, and water. In practice, this is not always the case. As we will see, many land use regulations result in an inefficient use of space and degradation of the environment. Land use planning is often referred to as urban planning when it focuses on cities and large, complex metropolitan areas. It is widely practiced in high-income nations. Middle and low-income countries face many challenges in designing and enforcing land use and urban planning laws. Land use in these countries tends to be governed by national efforts to protect natural resources such as forest policies or the establishment of parks and wildlife preserves. Often because of budget constraints, low-income countries often struggle to successfully implement and enforce conservation laws. In the United States, settlement and land use patterns over the past 75 years have resulted in an increasingly unsustainable form of development, often called urban sprawl. After World War II, the United States began to suburbanize, particularly because of the baby boom and the rise of the automobile culture. As land use patterns, sprawl and suburbia are characterized by low-density housing that spreads along major streets and arterial roadways. Cities lost their mixed-use urban centers in which homes, shops, businesses, and recreational spaces all coexisted with relatively high levels of population density. That is, the number of people living in a square mile or square kilometer. In Figure 11.5, it illustrates the contrast between urban mixed-use spaces and suburbs in the United States. The benefits associated with urban sprawl, often not talked about, are typically related to less expensive and larger single-family housing and smaller, more manageable political jurisdictions. However, sprawl results in long work commutes, greater conversion of agricultural land and open spaces, worsening water quality, and higher levels of material usage and cost. In short, the life cycle analysis for urban sprawl is not very good. Sprawl also results in the hollowing out of many American cities, making them much less livable spaces. As people migrate from mixed-use urban neighborhoods to the suburbs, amenities tend to decline. Urban centers became shopping districts at best, and sites of decline and decay at worst. Zoning is used as a primary tool of land use planning, and its principal purpose, in theory, is to define the legally permitted uses of land. In the United States, zoning is often practiced as single-use zoning. Community activities are highly segregated from one another, and only one type of land use is allowed in a designated zone. For instance, agricultural zoning would only allow farmers and farming. Residential zoning would only allow residences, business zoning such as restaurants, etc. So we couldn't closely align agriculture, residents, and businesses all in the same neighborhood. Because of this, residential neighborhoods are usually isolated from farms and commercial districts. For example, commercial districts are often allocated to very large tracts of land, separate from the user. Indeed, the widespread practice of single-use zoning is one of the reasons why sprawl emerged as such a basic pattern of the American urban landscape. The most commonly used zoning designations are residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, mixed-use, and recreational spaces. With respect to residential areas, zoning laws also define housing density, which specifies the number and type of dwellings allowed, typically per acre of proposed residential space. Residential housing density has some commonly classified definitions. such as low-density residential, typically ranging from 0.2 to 6 single or two-family housing units per acre. Medium-density residential, typically from 5 to 15 single and multifamily units per acre. A multifamily unit would be a duplex or apartment building. High-density residential usually reflects large multifamily structures like apartment complexes and usually has a density of more than 15 units per acre. Zoning provisions can affect the sustainability of the built environment by influencing the land area required for construction and also the amount of building material needed to comply with the zoning regulations. For example, the zoning provisions discussed above, housing density, the requirements for open space specified in Table 11.2, and single-use zoning all contribute to less compact, more spread out developments. Other zoning provisions that can affect sustainable land use practices include requirements for the building envelope, setback, and angle of bulk plane, and also the floor to area ratios. It's typical in the United States to have a required distance, called a setback, between a structure and an adjacent feature, such as a property line, street, another structure, or a stream. Figure 11.7 also illustrates setback requirements for residential dwellings. As seen in this image, the building structure must be completely within the buildable area, or building envelope, established by the setback distances and the size of the right-of-way. As with single-use zoning, U.S. residential setback requirements have also been criticized for contributing to urban sprawl because they encourage larger lot sizes and lower density development. Zoning ordinances can also specify a maximum building height and may define the angle of bulk plane in an attempt to prevent buildings from literally overshadowing smaller neighboring structures. The angle of bulk plane is typically determined by calculating the angle from the edge of the lot to be developed to the steepest angle of the proposed building, as illustrated in Figure 11.9. Depending on permitting building heights and angle of bulk plane plan requirements, zoning laws can also result in lower density residential areas. Zoning codes may also specify other key building parameters such as the floor to area ratio. The floor to area ratio is the ratio of the building's footprint floor area to the area of the lot on which the building is to be constructed. Building cannot exceed the specified floor to area ratio, although multiple building configurations are possible. An example of 3 methods comply with an FAR equal to 1 is illustrated in Figure 11.10. Note that requirements for the floor to area ratio will have an impact on the amount of building material required to construct a building. In summary, land use, zoning designations, and ordinances define the basic manner in which land can be used for the built environment, and their provisions can affect sustainable land use in important ways. Permitting uses, housing density, building envelopes, setbacks, widths of right-of-way, open space requirements, floor area ratios, angle of bulk plane, and many other specifications are necessary regulations for safety, convenience, and pleasing spaces. But individually and collectively, these factors can affect the location and arrangement of our structures, which ultimately affects land cover and its environmental benefits.